This thing on. Welcome to albertnet. Today's post is Old Yarn, the Enemy Coach. Introduction. This is the third Old Yarn installment on albertnet, inspired by my pioneering effort, the Chinelli jumpsuit, and the subsequent post, Bike Crash on Golden Gate Bridge. This is the kind of story that would normally be a From the Archives item, except I've never before written it down. So here's what I looked like at the time this story takes place. You can see I was kind of scrawny, goofy, and yet somehow self-possessed. So I realized the other day that I'm in my 10th year of coaching high school mountain bike racers. I had no idea when I started out that I would stick with it this long, but it's been a blast, so why stop? Now, something my current student athletes don't know, and there's no real point in telling them, is that before becoming a NICA coach in NorCal for the high school league, I had previous experience coaching. Decades ago, after high school, I took a gap year and moved to California to get residency to lower my future college tuition costs. During that time, I had several jobs, including a gig canning underwear, another answering calls at a radio station. Yes, that was me taking the 9th caller who got the free passes, and a third job working in a bike shop. On the side, I coached a team of junior road cyclists. There were about 8 or 10 of them. They were part of a larger team, the San Luis Obispo Cycling Club, SLCC, which also had something like 40 adults. This was in the fall of 1987 through the summer of 1988. Now, the coaching was supposed to be a paid gig, something like $7 an hour, but I don't think I ever got paid. That was fine. My love of the sport was enough incentive. In general, my role was to ride with the juniors, show them the ropes, drive them to races, and console them after the races and try to keep them from quitting. The last bit might seem uncharitable, but it was in fact a real struggle because bike racing is a very, very hard sport. And as you can read in various places on my blog, the hyperlinks are in the online version of this post, it can take a very long time to get good at this sport. Now, it was kind of hard for me to build cred with these juniors because, as you've probably already grasped, I was scarcely older than they were. I considered but rejected the strategy of briefing them on my own, albeit modest, success as a junior road cyclist, because it would have sounded would have been bragging, and after all, talk is cheap. So I just did my best to explain and model the right technique. To the extent I talked about my own racing, it was to describe how frustrating the sport was for me starting out, to impress upon these juniors how normal that is. Well, early one spring day in March or April of 1988, our team director decided, as a treat, to bring in a big fancy USCF certified coach to run a one-day clinic for these kids. The USCF was the United States Cycling Federation and was the governing body of road cycling. It's now known as USA Cycling, or USAC. Maybe it's USAC, I don't know how they say that. Anyway, we all met up at the bike shop that sponsored the team. Now, I knew nothing about the USCF coach certification process, but could only assume it was a complete joke based on the impression this guy immediately made. To wit, he struck me as a clown. Now, I know what you're thinking. Of course I would have it in for this guy, since here he was stealing my thunder. And sure, that's part of it. But it's not like I was immune to being impressed myself, and of course I was interested in getting whatever knowledge and insight I could from this guy. But right off the bat, he showed his true colors by showing up on a bike with these upturned, sawed-off handlebars. I hope you can see that all right. This is a somewhat fashionable fad among douchebags of that period. It was supposed to be aerodynamic and tell the world how fast you were on the flats. But of course it defeated the purpose of drop handlebars, which is an excellent design that remains the standard today because it gives the rider so many different ways to hold on to the bars over varied terrain. I scoffed at sawed-off bars even at the time, and in fact doubted it was actually more aero, based on the result of the Colorado State Time Trial Championship the previous year. A quick aside on that. In 1987, my friends P and J were both on the 7-Eleven junior team, which gave all the riders free road bikes but had only one time trial bike to go around. So the time trial bike had a smaller front wheel, a downsloping top tube, and upturned bullhorn-style handlebars, sort of the non-DIY version of what this dickhead coach had. So there was a bit of a debate over who got to use the time trial bike for the state championship. Jay pushed his case harder, P shrugged it off, and guess who ended up winning the race? P on his bog standard road bike, and by a significant margin. Years after this, wind tunnel tests confirmed that the bullhorn bars are no more aero. Only the hoop-shaped clip-on bars give an advantage. That's the ones where you put your hands like this. Now, the other thing about this fancy certified coach is that despite the temperature being in the lower to mid 50s Fahrenheit, he had bare legs. I'd spent all winter trying to teach my juniors to wear leg warmers when it's cool, and maybe half of them had actually listened, but now that was out the window. The coach's goal in his chewing leg warmers was obvious. He was showing off his big, shaved thighs. He was a sprinter, in fact more of a track rider than a roadie, and it showed. Of course there were stars in the kid's eyes, which the guy's swagger only increased. He talked constantly, and so much of what came out of his mouth was malarkey. For example, he told the riders not to try to do 2 races on consecutive days. Your body needs to recover. Target just one of the weekend's races. This flew in the face of what I'd been saying, which is that if you're attending the race weekend anyway, or at the venue both days, everyone should do both races, and that's the best way to improve your day-to-day recovery. Now, this blowhard also instructed the kids to try to figure out what they're good at and focus on that instead of trying to do everything well, which is ridiculous because stage races require the full range of capabilities, and it's fun to ride in the mountains even if you're better at sprinting. I feared that my juniors would note the discrepancies between what I, their almost peer coach, was saying versus this big-thighed USCF certified grown-up coach, and systematically unlearn everything I tried to teach them. Now, my own coaching style was, and remains, just to ride, not to talk too much, answer questions, and only provide tips during an obvious teachable moment. But this dude just loved to hold forth, and during our training ride, he kept up a steady stream of do this, don't do that, etc. At no point did he acknowledge that I was even a coach, much less ask me if he was teaching something, e.g. a rotating paceline, that I'd already covered, which I had. I was just another kid to him, which, I will freely confess, caused a quiet animosity to grow in me. But what could I do? I just went silently along, wondering if this one clinic could effectively end my coaching gig by stripping away all the scraps of cred I'd managed to stitch together over the preceding months. At the far point of our ride, before heading back toward the bike shop, the coach stopped us at a city park and said, "We're going to do a drill here. It's very important in bike racing to be able to jostle with other riders and not be afraid of some contact, of bouncing off each other. You also need to know the proper way to fall." I'm quoting this as though verbatim. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing from memory as best I can, but you catch the drift. So we instructed the riders to ride around on the grass and bump into each other and get a feel for that. I wasn't so sure this was a good idea since several of the kids were pretty new to the sport and might be a little freaked out. But what could I say? I stayed on the sideline and watched. To my horror, this big, stupid, thick coach started riding around among the juniors like a big cat selecting his prey and then knocking over one rider after another. What a dick. Just a big freaking bully showing off by terrorizing my poor juniors. That was one of the thoughts racing through my mind. The other was, oh good, this is going to be awesome. Because this coach didn't know about Road Warrior. Road Warrior was a game my brothers and friends and I had invented and played at since we were like 12 or 13. It consisted of biking around on residential streets and trying to run each other into curbs, parked cars, and or each other. It was not so different from what this douchey coach was doing, except it was on asphalt, and it was more level playing field, our skill levels being similar. For the most part, it was a game of chicken, though we did occasionally hit a car or the ground. Minor scrapes suffered in the process were as natural and expected as messing up the kitchen when you cook. The most important thing I learned from Road Warrior is the importance of staying low and getting underneath your opponent's body. I noted the effectiveness of this when playing against the neighbor kid, a pretty tough hard knocks type who had lived with various foster families and kept all their names, such that we referred to him as JLRRHN. By protecting his privacy with initials, I've ruined the almost poetic sound of all those two-syllable names strung together, but so be it. JLRRHN had street cred because he was almost the only kid in Boulder, it seemed, who wasn't completely white. Nobody, not even he, knew all what ethnicities he had. Plus, he'd cut off half his thumb in shop class. Still, I naturally assumed I'd get the better of him, being A, bigger, and B, already a somewhat seasoned cyclist. But he was really good at Road Warrior, despite being on a BMX bike, which we assumed would somehow be a disadvantage. From him, I learned about coming in low. I was also no slouch at jostling in an actual race. In Colorado, they would often mix the very large junior category with the Cat 3s, so you get a field of well over 100 riders. So this photo here is from just such a race, the 1987 Rocky Mountain News Criterium in Denver. That's me right in the middle there in the white and blue. And this photo was snapped not long before I was taken out in a massive pileup. So I didn't do anything right away. Instead, I waited a bit, savoring my anticipation of this coach's comeuppance, letting him bully my juniors some more until I was sure at least a couple of them were fighting back tears. Then I casually rode over to the douchebag and took him out. He was absolutely astonished. I'm quite sure he never even considered this possible, and probably wasn't even expecting anyone to challenge him. His dominance was of the untested Mike Tyson variety. Run roughshod over your opponent because he's too terrified to respond. Well, now he was on the ground. He immediately leapt to his feet, climbed back on his stupid bike with its upturned bars, and came at me, certain that it was only the element of surprise that had allowed me to take him down. Wrong. I knocked him over like a damn bowling pin. Then I circled around to set up for the next bout, looking across my juniors to get their reaction. You getting this, guys? Another clash, and the certified dumbass was on the ground again. He got angrier and angrier. His efforts got more forceful, but he just lacked the skill to accomplish anything. Eventually, the juniors put their bikes down and just sat on the grass on the gentle hill at the edge of the park, watching and enjoying the spectacle. Finally, after I'd gone at least 8-0 in takedowns, the humiliated coach realized he wasn't going to achieve anything except maybe a heart attack and ended the drill. The ride back to the shop was very quiet. And oddly, on my subsequent rides with the juniors, there was no trash talk about how badly I'd schooled the big bad USCF certified coach, which trash talk, I'll confess, I'd kind of been hoping to hear. But in fact, the enemy coach was never mentioned again. It was like he never existed, which, needless to say, was totally fine with me.